Taking you into the studio and behind the mixing board, legendary engineer Digby Smith has worked with Led Zeppelin, Free, Eric Clapton, Paul McCartney, Bob Marley, Stephen Stills. The list goes on and on. He has got so many great stories that he's going to share with you in this episode. And it's coming up next on Booked on Rock.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. Excited to have this episode's guest. He's a first-time guest on the show. He is the author of the book 1, 2, 3, 4, The Life and Times of a Recording Studio Engineer. It is Digby Smith. His career spans 4 decades, beginning at 19 years old when he joined Island Studios in London as a staff engineer. Digby, welcome to the podcast. Great to meet you. How are you?
I'm fine, Eric. Thank you for speaking with me. Much appreciated.
Thanks so much for being on. So many great stories in this book. Want to get to some of them today. You say right up front in the book's forward, it wasn't the fame or the leads that pulled you into a career as an engineer. Talk about when you fell in love with rock and roll and what led you down the path towards engineering and producing as well.
You go way back to when I was about 13 or 14 years of age, and my slightly older sister was coming home with her early rock and roll records, Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, and the Everly Brothers, and we had a tiny little record player with a speaker in the lid, and it was only a mono little turntable, but the sound of those records coming out of my sister's record player just captivated me. That I just had to be part of what I was listening to. So I did what a lot of us did at that age back in the mid '60s. I bought myself an acoustic guitar. I started learning all the chords, and then subsequently, by the time I was about 17, my sister was getting into the Beatles, and I remember hearing Paul McCartney count out the 1, 2, 3, 4 on the first track, on the first side of the Beatles' first album in the UK, which was Please Please Me. And when I heard that, I knew that I just wanted to be a part of what I was listening to.
There's a great story from very earlier in your career about Stephen Stills and his song, Love the One You're With. You were standing right next to him for the first performance ever of this song?
It must have been, because it was the previous night when Stephen was at his hotel in London on Park Lane. He'd booked into the studio where I was now working as a chief T-boy and mail room operator, and started to push my nose in and hang out on the sessions. And Stephen had booked the studio for a couple of weeks to do his first solo album. And I list the musicians that were present on that record in the book. I mean, it was the who's who of everybody that was anybody at the time. And it was, I don't know, day 3 or 4 into the sessions. They were nighttime sessions. They would start about 8 o'clock in the evening. Stephen came running into the control room about 7:30 with his acoustic guitar that he'd taken with him back to the hotel the night before. And he gathered everybody around him in the control room. And I made my presence felt. I entered on cue with a tray of tea for everybody. And I stood right next to Stephen as I handed him a cup of tea. And he said to everybody, "This is the song we're going to record tonight. I just wrote this last night in the hotel room." And he proceeded to play on the acoustic guitar, Love the One You're With. It was such a magical place to find yourself as for your first professional experience of working in a recording studio. Island Records were one of the biggest independent record labels of the time, and they were unique in as much as they had their own recording studios as well. So when I got my job there in January of 1970 as the T-boy and driving around in the truck, picking up all the cables for the newly built studio and picking up microphones and headphones and seeing the studio start from scratch. And those early sessions, which amongst them was Stephen Stills, there were all the island artists of the day were going to record there: Traffic, Free, Mott the Hoople, Cat Stevens. So although my official position was one of T-boy, I was already getting involved with helping the assistant engineers with duties such as, wrapping mic cables and putting up music stands and setting up headphones in the live room. So and Chris Blackwell, who was the owner of the label and the owner of the studio, he was very keen to let all us young guys get involved as early as we could. So within 6 months, Eric, I was not only engineering sessions, I was producing my first album. That's how meteorically fast it was to climb the career ladder at Island, thanks in no small part to the generosity of Chris Blackwell.
Yeah, you speak highly of him, and he had a certain vision. He had a certain ability that few had. He could hear something special.
Yes, he could, and it was a unique record label in so many respects. Such a broad roster of artists. You had all the folk acts that he'd signed, such as Fairport Convention, Sandy Denny, Cat Stevens, John Martin, and then you had the more, what we would refer to in those days as the more underground rock bands such as Free, Mott the Hoople, Spooky Tooth, and then you had the more sort of poppy stuff like Roxy Music, Robert Palmer. So as a young fledgling engineer, learning the ropes of how to conduct recording sessions and the different approaches that different styles of music might require, it was like being a kid in a candy store. I was just exposed to so many different types of music.
Traffic's Freedom Rider, great song. This was your first professional edit. A traumatic experience for you, right?
It was indeed. Going back to 1969, 68, 69, before I moved to London and started working professionally in a professional studio, I had a little recording set up in my bedroom, which is a little mono tape machine and one microphone and a 1/4-inch tape, which I used to splice together using scissors and sellotape. Wind forward, 12 months, 18 months, and I'm assisting for the engineer, the late, great Brian Humphreys, who recorded much of the Traffic stuff. And I'm assisting for Brian on these Traffic sessions. We did the recording and we did the mix of the track. It's early evening, 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening. Brian's gone home. Chris is standing there listening to the mix, and without going into too much detail here, but Chris wanted an edit. He wanted to just change a couple of bars in the middle of the mix. Brian wasn't there anymore, so I was taken back to my bedroom and sellotape and scissors in my mind. And Chris said, "Do you know how to edit?" And I bravely suggested that I did, although I'd never done an edit in a professional recording studio. But there was all the splicing tape and the razor blades. And I courageously attempted the edit with beads of sweat dropping off my brow onto the editing block, and I did the edit. Chris didn't have much confidence in my ability, especially when he saw my hand holding the razor blade shaking with nerves. But I stuck at it. I got the edit done, played it to Chris. He liked it. He said, "Right, put the tape in the box, fill out the worksheet, see you tomorrow." No word of thank you, no praise, no, just I thought, well, there you go. That's the business you're in. Job done, get it done. No song and dance, and fortunately, I kept my job.
I can relate to the experience because I worked in radio at the tail end of the reel-to-reel era. So for those maybe a little too young to understand what that process is and how maddening it can be. I mean, nowadays, if you make a mistake, you can just redo or hit Control Z and it goes back and, oh, there it is. You could just recut it. But you had to splice it at just the right point and then tape it together. And if you did make a mistake, if you cut it in the wrong place, there's no turning back. I mean, unless you had a duplicate recording of it and another reel to reel, you could try it again. Otherwise, that's it.
Which you wouldn't have had at the time. No, what you would do is you'd by a technique of revolving the spools back and forth, you could hear the sound of where you'd edit on a bass drum or a snare drum, and you could find where that was on the playback head, make a mark with a Chinograph pencil, pull the tape off, lay it in the block, splice through. Yeah, if you got it wrong, you had to put it all back together again. Why, it was fraught with disaster, potentially.
You mentioned Free, such an underrated band. Paul Rodgers, later of Bad Company fame, the late, great Paul Kossoff on guitar, Simon Kirke of Bad Company as well on drums, Andy Fraser on bass. You were a big fan by the time you worked with them on Free at Last, the album from 72. Talk about your experience working with Free. Paul Kossoff had your back in one incident where things got heated with you and Paul Rodgers.
Yeah, again, just briefly dipping back into the late 60s there. I had quite a number of island records in my record collection at home, and amongst them were the first couple of Free albums, so I was a massive fan. And then, yeah, zoom forward a couple of years, and I'm actually in the studio with these guys, and it's those pinch yourself moments that you remember, and a great bunch of guys. We were all about the same age, late teens, early 20s. Had an affinity to their music straight away. I assisted. Initially, my first involvement with Free was on the Highway album as an assistant engineer to the late, great Andy Johns. And when they came back to do their next album, Free at Last, they asked if I'd sit behind the desk and be the main engineer. And yeah, do you want me to tell you about moment?
Yeah. Before you tell that, we should know too, they already had the huge hit All Right Now.
Yes, they did. Yeah, that came off the Fire and Water album, and then I think the Highway album never had a hit to match. So the kind of pressure was on, having had a hit on their third album. Now, there's a thing worth mentioning to young musicians and recording artists today. Here was a record label that had done 2 albums with Free, with no hits, no radio airplay, nothing, just live performances and a couple of albums out there. Then on the third album, there was 1 track, All Right Now, which they edited it down, made it single length for the radio, and that changed everything. So what record label today, if you could even find a record label today, would stay with an artist till their third album when they had the hit? So the pressure was on after that hit. And the 4th album, Highway, I don't think there were any. There were a couple of singles, but no hits. So then Free at Last, I don't think we had a single. Maybe With a Little Bit of Love, was that on Free at Last, or Heartbreak? I'm confused.
Free at Last. Yeah, let's see. From 72, no standout singles, maybe A Little Bit of Love. Would that have been the single?
That was the single, and it got in the charts, but it never scaled the heights that All Right Now had. So there you are, another day in a studio with the band, invariably late night sessions, working right through the night till sunup. A couple of weeks into the album, everybody's getting a bit, it's the pressure's on. We can sense from the label that they want this record to. So it can get very emotional in the creative atmosphere of the recording studio. And I don't know, what is it, 2-3 o'clock in the morning, Paul Rodgers is by the microphone and he's about to do a vocal. on one of the tracks. And I'm fiddling around on the desk, getting the headphone balance for him that he's happy. He always like plenty of drums, plenty of bass. And worth noting, Cossie would never put his lead guitar solo work on until the vocal was recorded. That was his golden rule. He said, I always want to wait till the lead vocal has been sung, then I'll put my guitar parts on and I'll weave my way around it, which was that's how Cossie was.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So Paul's out there at the microphone. We're getting ready to run the tape, checking the mic level. I'm fiddling around, maybe with a bit of reverb in the headphones. Anyway, I obviously made the mistake of putting too much reverb on Paul's voice. So he flung the headphones off his head, threw them onto the floor, came storming into the control room and eyeballed me and finger pointed me, and he just lost it. He said, Digby, don't, and I won't repeat the language, but essentially the message was, Digby, don't ever put that much reverb on my voice in the headphones again. I can't sing with that much reverb. And he was quite aggressive, would be too strong a word, but he was vehement in his protestations. Little Paul Kossoff literally stood between me and Paul Rodgers, and Cossie said to Paul, he said, don't ever talk to Digby like that again. He said, Digby is the most important man in the room. He's capturing what we play and what we feel and how we go about it, and he's encouraging us. So don't ever do that again. And Paul Rodgers, I mean, short of us, but all welling up, it was like point made. And I said, oh, sorry, Paul, I won't do that with the reverb again. He said, oh, that's okay. Well, I didn't mean to shout. So we had group hugs and everything was great. And Paul went back out to the vocal microphone. I switched all the reverb off his vocal mic just to be sure. And Paul then delivered the definitive vocal and all was well.
Yeah, that just shows you, though, the pressure that everybody is under to come up with a hit or to come up with just a good recording, and the artists want to make sure everything sounds good. You want to make sure everything sounds good, and those things can happen. Credit to all three of you guys. Or actually Kossoff mostly, right? I mean, he's the one who came in and
absolutely. What a gentleman he was. I had another time with Simon, the drummer. He was and just to say, after that instance, it's amazing. Sometimes, like with any relationships, sometimes, words are said, it breaks the tension, and sometimes it's like a release valve, and everyone's the better for it. There was another time on a track that had sort of two sections to it, and when there was at the end of the first section, there was a sort of a 2-bar pause or a 1-bar pause, and then Simon's drum fill, and then we go into the outro section of the song. I forget the title, name escapes me, but we got the track all recorded and all the guitar overdubs and the vocals, and it's all good to mix. The idea was we were just going to overdub some tambourine on the track. And rather than one person play the tambourine, the idea was that 3 people were going to play a tambourine each out in the live room. So I had to set up like 3 and even a couple of ambient mics, 3 or 4 microphones, and record this orchestral tambourine performance in stereo. So such was the desk and the routing of the signal path that there was only groups 1 and 2 that you could patch into the stereo, but I didn't want to record on tracks 1 and 2 because that was Simon's drums. So what I was supposed to do is come out of the patch bay out of groups 1 and 2 and plug into, I don't know, tracks 13 and 14 or something. Of course, I did all that, but mistakenly, again, it's probably 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. We're all a bit the worse for wear. I put tracks 1 and 2 into record. And of course, when it came to that part of the song, and there were 2, 3, 4, and I hit record to record the tambourines, and Simon's drums disappeared.
Oh.
Because I'd erased the bass drum and the snare.
Oh my God.
I hit stop on the tape machine as quickly as I could and saw my life flash before me.
Right.
I thought, I'm dead. I am dead. It's been nice working here. I've lasted. It's going to be back to the bedroom and the sellotape and the scissors. And so I think it was Simon said, why'd you stop the tape, Digby? I said, I just didn't know. I thought, well, you just got to. Sometimes it's in the world of engineering, if you make a mistake, if it's pilot error, you can sometimes bluff your way around it and say, the channel switch cut out, or it didn't go in record. The button's faulty or something. But there was no way out, Eric. There was no way. I had to fess. So I called them. I said, can you come back into the control room, guys? And Simon said, what's happened? And I just said to Simon, I thought, well, I just got to tell him. I said, I've erased your drums.
Oh, boy.
And I thought, he's a tough looking guy, Simon, and he's fit, behind the kit there. He's always like, I thought, this is it, man. This is it. Simon said, are the drum mics still set up, Digby? And I looked out into the live room and I said, yeah, they are. And I looked on the desk. Yeah, all the drum faders were still where they were. Simon said, I'll re-record them. He said, I wasn't very happy with the drumming on the outro of the track anyway. He said, so don't worry about it, Digby. It's fine. He said, we all make mistakes, man. And he just walked out, put his headphones on. I wind back, hit record, and Simon just replaced the drums effortlessly, faultlessly, one take.
A huge sigh of relief.
A huge sigh of relief, and I felt, and I kind of, if I wasn't already, I felt a bonding with Simon from then, and I've kept in touch with him, casually over the years, and he's still working and playing and teaching and stuff, and he's another what a gentleman.
You've worked with some great engineers. You mentioned Andy Johns, Glyn Johns you worked with as well. You described both of them as artisan craftsmen at work. What made them so good?
Again, you got to take your mind back to the state of the art as it was in the, before I started professionally, but back in the 60s. Probably Jeff Emmerich at EMI Studios, later to become Abbey Road, was probably one of the first pioneers. With all the advent of the improvements in the technology and the addition of multi-tracking, 8-track, 16-track, 24, as the technology evolved, and more audio signaling toys to play with that could create special effects and sounds, and the amount of manipulation that you could do with sound and with the recording process was racing ahead at breakneck speed. And the old school engineers would have been just technical guys. They would have just literally they would be called balance engineers. They would get at the balance of the band and record it probably on a 3 or 4 track tape machine, and that was it. It was pure engineering. But when these guys like Glyn and Andy came along with these new desks, they started doing things with the desk, like overdriving the mic amps and the preamps, turning the tape over and doing things in reverse, and over compressing guitars and vocals to make them sort of give them a distortion that was quite pleasing to the ear. So yeah, it was as the technology advanced, the new breed of engineers, of which I was coming in on the tail end of, was starting to do amazing things with audio, and you hear it on the records of the day.
Oh, absolutely. So they're working that mixing board like Jimi Hendrix would work the guitar. You're
absolutely right there, Eric, and I think I referred to it in there as At the end of the evening, when it'd be time to do the final mix of the track you've been working on and listening to over and over and over and over again all day, all night, and now you got to do the final stereo mix. So many, you'd have backing vocals on the same track as the tambourines. You'd have different guitars on different tracks, and the piano would suddenly become the organ where you'd recorded it just instead. So now to do the mix was like the desk was, as the engineer, the desk was your musical instrument. And now when you're doing the final mix, it's your time to play and to do a performance. And if you got the performance right, the guys in the band would be so ecstatic, you know. Occasionally, ergonomically, it would just be impossible. There would be just too many moves to make. You'd have to be, you know, lifting the backing vocals during the middle eight at the same time as the drums need to come down a bit. So you physically couldn't stretch that far over the desk. So invariably, you'd get a couple of the musicians to join in and give them a couple of faders to move. And golden rule would be that don't ever give the drummer the drum faders, don't ever give the lead guitarist the lead guitar fader, don't ever give the vocalist the lead vocal fader, because invariably you'll get mission creep. You know, the drummer will keep lifting his drums. And
I'm fascinated with all of that stuff. I always love doing production work in radio and the happy accidents that would come along. Like if you take two of the same tracks and put them on two different separate tracks and you move one just slightly, all of a sudden you get this reverb sound. If you move it a little more, it's going to have a different sound to it. It's almost an echo. All those things I'm endlessly fascinated with. And actually I was going to ask you, are there any happy accident stories that you have where you just stumble upon something? You say, whoa, that's cool. Let's keep that.
Yeah. I think one time on one mix we were doing, and we there was a couple of bars that we didn't get quite right. So I said, well, listen, let's just focus on that. I don't know, those 4 bars in the third chorus where the guitar parts are slightly different or something. Let's just mix that section of the song, and then we'll splice it in. And we mix that section of the song, and so there's loads of cutting of tape. There's bits of tape hanging here, bits of tape hanging there. You stick the bit of tape to the machine, and then they grab the bit of tape that you want and lay it in and splice it in. Wind the tape back, press play. I think on one occasion I inadvertently put the tape the wrong way round. So when you hit play and it came to that section, it was suddenly in reverse. So you just feel like, I don't know what it would be, just so, and you go, wow, that sounded amazing. You think, no, I've made a mistake. I've put the tape in the wrong way. I'll have to take it up. No. Let's use that. That's brilliant. So you might end up just using one bar of it, but accidents like that, and yeah.
What was this? There's a story about on Zeppelin 2 with Whole Lotta Love, that part where you hear Robert Plant foreshadowing the lyric. It sounds, it's very faint.
Do you want to
way down inside, right? Yeah, that's Eddie Kramer and Jimmy Page stumbled on something.
Just a quick, as non-technical as possible, that some of your viewers will understand this, but try and keep it as simple as possible. With old-fashioned magnetic recording tape, it has oxide. It has metal oxide on the tape. And the reaction of the recording head and the magnetic oxide on the tape is what records the audio, which today we would look at as being a WAV on Logic or on Pro Tools. You'd see it as a waveform. That's the waveform is recorded on the oxide, in the oxide. It's buried into the, it alters the metallic structure of the oxide, and that's where the audio is captured in the metal of the oxide of the tape. So when you wind the tape back, it's layering on top of each other, isn't it? Each full revolution, another piece of tape sticks to the back of the previous bit of tape. So and you get what's called print through. sometimes if you've accidentally, particularly if you've accidentally over-recorded something, like a vocal perhaps, where you've put too much magnetic energy into the oxide, so the oxide's somewhat saturated with the audio. And when you wind the tape back, it leaks through, it prints through. So if you solo the vocal, you probably find that pre-echo of the vocal is probably there a lot of the time, but so quiet that you wouldn't notice it in amongst all the guitars. But in that section of the song where the vocal's pretty much on its own, you can hear it. And what
like
Andy,
a phantom, it's like a phantom track.
And what Andy would have done, going back to this using the equipment creatively and thinking, oh shit, what are we going to do with that? You can hear the vocal before it comes in. Oh my God, we'll have to keep dipping the fader down. We'll have to keep muting it, because you didn't have automation in those days, but you did have multi-tracking. So Jimmy probably thought, well, rather than turn it down and try and get rid of it, what about if we lift the fader and put a bit of reverb on it and make it sound haunting? And I hear that today, and it was a mistake that proved beneficial.
When I think of Island Records, the first artist that comes to mind is Bob Marley. You worked with Bob Marley and the Wailers. They were relatively unknown at that time, though. When was this, and what was that experience like?
They were totally unknown, Eric. Again, going back working for Island, I omitted this category at the beginning of this conversation, as well as the folk, the rock, the pop. There was, of course, the reggae. And even when I started at Island in 1970, they had Jimmy Cliff, Toots and the Maytals. There was a lot of stuff that was coming out on Tough Gong and Mango Records, Trojan, that was being that Island were licensing. So obviously with Chris Blackwell and his Jamaican roots and the connection there. So there was very much a reggae presence at the label. Although, and worth mentioning at this point that as well as all the roster of Island artists of the day, the studios were open to the general public, not least of all, that's why we had Led Zeppelin and the band and Stephen Stills and Joe Cocker. We had all sorts of artists that weren't signed to the label. That's how I got to be working with Led Zeppelin. And I was working with an artist who wasn't on the label, who was signed to CBS, the guy called Johnny Nash. I was working on Johnny Nash's I Can See Clearly Now, his album. And Johnny was signed to CBS. Johnny Nash's keyboard player was a guy called John Rabbit Bundrick, Texan keyboard player. Johnny went way back. And so when Johnny Nash booked the studio to do some keyboard overdubs on his album, he had John Rabbit Bundrick do the keyboards, and I'd engineered a lot of stuff with Rabbit. So Rabbit got me to be the engineer on the Johnny Nash stuff. And it was, it was in one afternoon on one of the Johnny Nash sessions, another day in the studio, another overdub, and Johnny Nash turns up with this, I say little guy, short guy, with short dreads, not even down to his shoulder blades, but short dreads. And Johnny Nash turned to me and he said, "Digby, this is my friend Bob. He's a reggae singer." And I said, "Nice to meet you, Bob." And we played a couple of tracks and Bob was nodding his head and listening to the music. And then Bob, who I later found was called Bob Marley, but when I first met him, it was just Bob. And so Bob, Johnny, and Johnny Nash's manager, a guy called Danny Sims, and I think Danny Sims was managing Bob Marley as well at the time. They all left me and Rabbit in the control room on our own to get on with some keyboard work. And Johnny, Bob, and Danny went upstairs to have a meeting with Chris Blackwell. And I think that was probably the day that Blackwell signed Bob.
Whoa. Oh, man.
So then, I don't know, wind forward another couple of months, and we're getting these. We would typically get tapes from Jamaica. They would be 8-track, 1-inch analog 8-track recordings. Many of them would have been recorded at Lee Scratch Perry's studio in Kingston. A couple of other studios out there. They're pretty rough and ready, pretty funky sounding tapes. You'd invariably, there wouldn't be a track listing to tell you what's all. It'd just be a box with an artist's name on, and you just put it on, and we'd get an 8-track machine in, and then transfer all the contents of the 8-track reel to reel. We'd transfer them over to a 16-track multi-track, thereby giving you 8 extra tracks to play with. So the Bob Marley Catch a Fire album, his first album, I don't know whether that was actually on Island or whether it was Tough Gong, but it was licensed as an Island record. And myself and a couple other house engineers, Tony Platt was another engineer at Island who went on to do great things.
AC/DC, I know that name from the AC/DC stuff. Yeah.
You should get him on if you get a chance.
I would love to.
Yeah, I don't hear from him these days, but lovely gentleman. And so we'd get these tapes, and we get somebody like Rabbit to come in and put some extra keyboards on. We get, Steve Winwood was in the building. You get him to put some stuff on. And Reebok, the Ghanaian conga player, was around. We'd get him into, and then of course you'd get Bob, or a couple of the Wailers would come in and put some extra stuff, and then when you were mixing them, you had sort of the original old recordings, and plus a bunch of new overdubs. And Blackwell's idea was to try and just popularize the music a little more, make it a little more westernized, make it a little more poppy or rocky. But you had to be mindful that you didn't untangle the original feel that came from those original 8-track tapes with all the rough and ready basic sounds on them. You wanted to enhance it, not alter it, and that. So yeah, that's how I found myself in the studio with Bob Marley. But we had no idea at the time, Eric, that we were writing the first chapter of a very important book in the history of popular music. It was I was as excited about working with him and his band on particularly that album. I did a little bit of work on the next album, Burning, but not an awful lot. But Catch a Fire, we were all involved with that. But I would be as equally excited if on a Wednesday evening, when the Island Records football team, the Island Records soccer team, would go over the park on a Wednesday evenings, and we'd always have a kick around, and Bob used to come and play football with us. So I played football with him 2 or 3 times.
He was a good player, right?
He was fantastic. He was a great, I think I mentioned in the book, actually, there are many analogies between, sport in general, if not just football. The importance of being, even if you're the quarterback or you're the center forward, you're the main goal scorer, it's important that you realize you're just part of a team, and that you need everybody to be working together and heading in the same direction. And I always say, and I think I mentioned it in the book, that the way Bob Marley played football was the way he was in the studio. No ego, no look at me, I'm the main guy here. It's like, it's all part. He's part of a greater team, and if you want to win, you've got to all play together.
The Booked on Rock podcast is part of the Boneless Podcasting Network. If you're a fan of classic rock and classic film like I am, go to boneless.lovable.app to find over 20 great shows there. That's boneless.lovable.app, or just go to bookedonrock.com, click on the logo. It'll take you right to the Boneless Podcasting Network. It is what you want it to be. Listen with confidence. You work with Eric Clapton, Paul McCartney, Little Feat, Sparks, the London Symphony Orchestra. What were the projects you worked on with McCartney and Clapton?
With Clapton was on the Stephen Stills albums, and also there was a couple of days that when Stephen Stills' engineer, Bill Halverson, his biggest claim to fame was recording all the Crosby, Stills and Nash stuff. Hence, he was Stephen's engineer. And when we'd finished the Stephen Stills, his second solo album, which I was by now assisting as an engineer with Bill, when the Stephen Stills album recording track had finished, Bill was in town for a couple more days. And while he was in town, Eric, he was recording a solo album with Eric Clapton at the time as well. And while Bill was in London and Eric Clapton must have been in London, Eric came into the studio for a couple of days and did some work on his solo album. I can picture the album sleeve, but I can't remember the title.
What year would it have been? 72, 73?
73.
Okay.
There's a track called Red Bottle of Red Wine.
Bottle of Red Wine.
And Eric did the vocal to that there, and I recorded that with Bill.
Oh, that's from his debut solo record, 1970. Does that sound right?
1970 was as early as that then. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it must have been after Stephen's first solo album then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. And McCartney, what was the project with Paul?
That came about. Paul's older brother, a chap called Mike, he goes by the name of Mike McGear. He is a Liverpool poet, but at the time he was also writing music. And as fate would have it, Mike McGear was signed to Island Records to do a solo album called Woman. And myself, I think probably Tony as well, a couple of us were engineering on the Mike McGear solo album. In the office, you'd get the week's schedule of what sessions you'd be working on as an engineer. So you go in and look and check. You know, you got working with Free on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, maybe Bob Marley on Thursday or Friday, maybe Spooky Tooth on Saturday, whatever. So I looked up on the bookings board in the studio office, and it's got 2 days, Saturday and Sunday. I'm down as engineer on the Mike McGear sessions, which was nothing unusual, but it meant I was going to be working the weekend. But hey, that goes with the territory. So I turn up on the Saturday morning, and Mike turns up, and we put the kettle on. We're making a cup of tea. Let's talk about what are we going to do in the studio today. Have you got a game plan, Mike? He said, yeah. And out of his bag, he brought out a little 7-inch plastic spool of tape. He said, last night, me and my brother and his wife we were jamming, and we recorded it on a little tape machine at home. So my brother's coming and his wife are coming down later to put a bit of guitar on and do some singing. We're going to put some overdubs. So I said, oh, that sounds interesting. And I handed Mike his tea, and off he went into the control room. And I remember pausing for a second thinking, I know Mike McGear's got a younger brother. And I'm wondering, is it going to be who I think it might be? Is it going to be the guy that shouted out the counting on the first Beatle album that sent shivers down my spine and was the basis for the title of the book? I thought I just had to kind of gather my thoughts and put my professional hat on and try and walk up the stairs without dropping the tray of tea. And anyway, I walked in. Before, I was actually sitting in the reception area, and a yellow Rolls Royce pulls up outside, which you don't see every day. And out steps this guy, handsome guy with dark hair in a yellow suit. And he marches towards the door of the studios with his wife dutifully walking behind him. She was carrying all the guitars, by the way.
Yeah.
In walked Well, he wasn't a knight then. More Paul McCartney, and up into the Studio One at Basin Street we went, and over a couple of days recorded vocals, bass guitar, guitars, keyboards, more vocals, more bass. And by now, Eric, I was thinking I'm really going to impress this guy now. You're at the best studio in London, one of the newest studios in London, and we're the best, and I'm going to give him my best. He was very quick in the studio. He was like a one take on the bass, right over to the piano, couple of like record, blah blah blah. So as quick as he could switch instruments and that, I was changing tracks on the desk. I was doing the headphone mix. I was winding the tape back, ready to go into record. If he wanted it, say, play the tape from the second chorus onwards, I had all the numbers of where the musical arrangement was, so I could wind back. But I was hot. I was hot for a couple of days, and you just forget. I'm thinking, I don't care if this could be the King of England in the. You just go, I'm going to do a good job, and in between takes, him and Linda would sit on the sofa in the control room, listening back to what we'd recorded. The two of them would be kissing and cuddling on the sofa like a couple of teenage lovebirds, singing and practicing the harmonies. He'd be saying, "Look, this is the harmony I want you to sing." And I have to say, she was good, Eric. I know she came for a lot of criticism, but thinking, how can you have a woman who's not even a musician in the band, in Wings? No, she was good. And what she didn't know, she could pick it up. Really, she had a good musical ear. And she made gallons of tea for us all, and I just felt like part of the family. And it was there's a story that follows on behind that, but I'll leave that for the book.
Which we should mention the title of the book, 1, 2, 3, 4, The Life and Times of a Recording Studio Engineer, Digby Smith. The book is out and you can get it just in time for the holidays. Makes for a great holiday gift. Led Zeppelin. I love the quote. He said, "So where do you start when writing about your recollections with regard to being party to the privileged inside the world of Led Zeppelin? You worked with them during the Zeppelin 3 final mixes. You also worked with them during the 4 sessions. You also talk about Since I've Been Loving You, the story about Robert Plant. One take nails the vocals. But I do want to ask you about Celebration Day, because I'm going to now listen back, and at 23 seconds into that track, there's something that you do there that is kind of like your signature moment. What happens?"
Yeah. You're listening to the song, and it would have been, the first time anybody's heard it other than Andy Johns, the engineer, and the guys in the band. So I was assisting for Andy Johns on Zeps 3 and 4. But in those days, as described as it might be just as a tape operator, but as an assistant engineer, you'd often find yourself, hands on the desk and helping with a mix or something where a couple of extra fingers are needed, and dropping in a couple of times when Jimmy Page would have done 2 or 3 guitar takes and trying to comp the best bits to, make a montage of the best of the 3 takes to make one take. And I used to, Andy probably thought I was a bit of an imposter or a bit preposterous or a bit pushy, but I could never keep my ideas to myself. And when I heard the intro to Celebration and how the drums make their entrance, I mentioned it previously about reverse tape, trying things by turning the tape over. One new idea that was knocking around in mixing circles amongst some of us more progressive engineers wanting to try new things, as well as playing the music in reverse. You could get the reverb to be in reverse. So instead of the attack and the impact and then the diffusion of the reverb sound, you start off with the diffused sound, and it reduces to a stop. And the way you do that, without getting too technical, is you turn the tape over, you add reverb to the drums, a really nice long reverb, and then you record that the consequence of that reverb, just the reverb. If you've got an empty track or two on the multi-track machine, you record the reverb on its own on the tracks, and you turn the tape back over to its normal direction. And then when you lift up the faders that you recorded the reverb on, the reverb starts big and ends up going small. It start off with the diffusion of the reverb, and you end up with where the reverb began. And I suggested Jimmy and to Andy that the intro would sound fantastic if you had some reverse reverb that would suck you into the drums as they come in. Jimmy always had his hand on his chin. He was always pacing around the control room, always thinking, always mindful. Yeah, I think
the genius.
The genius. You could hear it whirring away. He thought that, yes, that's a good idea. I'd be interested to hear what that sounds like. Andy was probably like, oh God, there's this young kid, just coming out of my job, But no, Andy just stepped aside and he said, you go ahead and do what you got to do. And again, you got to be very careful that you don't put the wrong track in record, and be mindful of the ergonomics and the mathematics of turning a piece of tape upside down, because now track 1 is track 16 and track 2 is track 15, because they're all the other way up now. So if your empty tracks are tracks 1 and 2, make sure you record it on track 15 and 16. Don't record it on 1 and 2 like I did with Simon.
Yeah.
But so suitably cautionary, I went through the procedure and I recorded the reverb of the drums on a couple of extra tracks, turned the tape back over, and I wound it back and I pressed play, and Jimmy just said, yep, love it. I moved away from the desk and let Andy back in at that point. But even Andy, to his credit, he said, that's a fantastic idea, Dick. He said it really, really works.
What a thrill for you.
Oh, it was definitely a feather in the cap.
Hey guys, we'll get back to the show, but first I want to tell you about an exclusive deal for Booked on Rock listeners. Get 15% off any purchase at oldglory.com. Over 300,000 officially licensed items covering music, sports, entertainment, and pop culture. Merchandise featuring legendary music artists like Bob Marley, The Beatles, Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and many, many more. Go to oldglory.com. Make sure to use the promo code BookedOnRock. Also find a link in this episode's show notes, or just go to bookedonrock.com and click on My Deals. You moved to Los Angeles at the age of 24 to work as a freelance engineer and producer. Albert Lee you worked with, Robert Palmer you worked with, and you also worked with Booker T and the MGs. And unfortunately, we just lost Steve Cropper,
yes,
guitarist. So probably a good time to ask you about him and your experience working with the band. And do you have any good stories, Steve Cropper stories?
Not too many specific personal recollections, other than it was on a record it was one of these lost records. I think it was for Electra Asylum with a duet called Packler Meredith. It was Jimmy Packler and was it Jimmy Meredith as well. Anyway, the album was called Packler Meredith. And the producer was a chap from Alabama called Steve Smith, famous producer. I worked with Steve on the Robert Palmer stuff. Steve Smith produced a lot of the Robert Palmer stuff and was a very successful producer. And it was engineering for Steve on this Packler Meredith. On the Robert Palmer album, which we'd done some months before, Steve got all the guys from Little Feat to be the session musicians. So there you are in the studio in Los Angeles, and I've got the Little Feat rhythm section.
Oh,
it makes you. I tell you the difference it makes, Eric, when you lift those faders up on the drums and the guitars, and when you've got proper musicians out there playing. It's you basically just put the faders up in a straight line and hit record. There's really.
It's like rarefied air. Yeah, they don't get better than that.
And then with Steve asked me, he said, I'm recording this album for Electra, Packler Meredith. I got a good bunch of musicians lined up to play on it. And so we turn up. I think that was at Clover Studios in Los Angeles. I think that was always Steve's favorite place to work. It was either at Clover or United Western. Anyway, yeah, we turn up. Who's the band? Best part of Booker T and the MGs. And again, the same. And again, Eric, and I emphasize this to perhaps more of your younger listeners who probably, if they're aspiring to getting into the record industry and producing and recording and things, the temptation is firstly to faint when you turn up at the studio and there's Booker T and the MGs, a rhythm section for the next 2 or 3 days, So then you flash back to all those records you got at home when you were an 18-year-old kid in Birmingham, listening to these 45 RPMs on your sister's mono record player, and the sounds that were leaping out of those records, and now here you are with the guys who this is where it came from. These are the guys. So you have to really take a deep breath, make sure you got your professional head on, and just go about, You don't want to be talking to Steve. Oh, what was it like working with Otis Redding? He's probably fed up of everybody asking him what was it like?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a story about Dock of the Bay. Is that true that you were working till 5 o'clock in the morning doing the mix, and that you took it over to the, I didn't want to, and plus you haven't got time. You haven't got time because there's a song being routine. There's singers there. People are sitting around a piano looking at chord charts and chord sheets, and people are writing notes and scribbling things out and practicing, the bass lines and what's the kind of right guitar sound we're looking for here. A lot of experimenting, plug in a different amp, try a different guitar. Yeah, that works. So
you're there as a professional, so you got to remind yourself that, because you're there in your head. It's half fan, half professional. It's like going back and forth in your head.
Yeah, and you have to put the little half fan bit. You have to kind of put that to one side,
right? Put them in a box for a little while.
Put them in a box for a little while, and before you know it, like I say, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. Everybody's gone home, and then you turn up the next day. First thing is tidy up the studio, make sure all the headphones are still working, get a fresh reel of tape on. Listen, what's the song we're going to do today? You go through. So it's only in subsequent years that you look back, which is where the idea for the book came from. And I'm telling people these stories, and I think my wife in particular, Kim, she probably got fed up of hearing these stories. Yeah. I'd say just write them down and be done with them, and then we won't have to suffer listening to them.
Exactly. Right. I know the feeling. I always want to talk about all this stuff with people, and some of them are really into it. Some of them are just like, yeah, okay, you've told me this before.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know what happens. A couple of glasses of beer, and they start coming out. So it's only in subsequent years, in fact, many, many years later, that you look back and think, God, I was in the studio, I was recording Steve Cropper. And then when I flash up on Facebook a couple of days ago, I'm just thinking, I wish I could have got to know him better. But, we were at work.
Well, these days, let's finish with what you're up to these days, what you've been doing recently. You remixed 2 Bad Company albums, the self-titled debut, which is a classic, and Straight Shooter, another great album. You also mixed their first official live album. You did some work on Black Sabbath's Volume 4 deluxe box set. You took the original 16-track analog tapes, remixed the music. For those who may not be familiar, we often hear about an album remixed and an album remastered. What is the difference between the two?
When an album is remastered, invariably they've taken hold of the original, for the most part, stereo quarter-inch tape that would have had the original mixes on, as mixed by the engineer, producer, and the artist at the time, from which the original album would have been pressed probably onto vinyl. And go back to those sorts of records. When an album is remastered, they take those original stereo recordings, the mix, and reprocess it through some equalization, some additional compression, maybe some they'll use some digital equipment. It's invariably then be available as on CD and as an MP3, as a download for streaming and stuff. So remastering is taking the original mix and just polishing it and refining it, and perhaps trying to improve the fidelity, the audio fidelity of it. When an album is remixed, you go back to the multi-tracks, you go back to the raw ingredients, you go back to the kitchen with the knife and the chopping board and all the carrots and the onions, and you remake the cake. So
each individual instrument and vocal track, all of that separated, and you can now move up, move down, do whatever. So are you there with the artist or somebody on behalf of the artist to say, this is what we want? The original recording didn't have enough of that bass pedal in it. Can you push that up? Or what's that process like?
It's a completely different process today, a completely different world, Eric. I'm here in my little home-based project studio. I got Logic Pro, my keyboards, my guitars. If I get a commission to remix an album, I'm not likely to be playing any instruments on it. That's a different project. Sometimes
so they send you the stems and say, you do your thing.
They transfer it from the original multi-track recordings, whether it's a live performance or a studio performance. Invariably, if it's a studio recording of a famous song, the record labels and the management company are always interested if there's perhaps an alternative vocal take that wasn't used on the final master, or if there was an alternative guitar solo that, they had a choice of two guitar solos. They went with guitar solo B, the second take. But when you listen to it, guitar solo A, the first take, it's pretty good, no mistakes, but they just chose. So you might be asked to, feature alternative takes, or alternatively, the brief might be, no, we want the same guitar solo, so make sure you find the right one. But you basically go back to the bass drum, the snare, the overheads, the toms, the bass guitar, the guitars, the keyboards, the vocals, the harmony vocals, because it's all recorded on separate tracks on the multi-track, invariably 16-track, most of those.
Is Paul Rodgers and Simon, do they have input on what they want? Does Tony Iommi with the Sabbath box, do they have say in what you are going to end up doing with these mixes?
No, because unlike the sessions I've described, we've talked about being in the studio with Steve Cropper, being in the studio with Paul McCartney, being in the studio with Stephen Stills, being there while the music's being created and recorded and the ideas are springing up as and when, and they're captured there and then. This is stuff that's already been recorded, and I'm here on my own with just the stems, and I do the mix. I'll do a mix of one side of the album, and I send it invariably to the management company. They'll listen to it for a couple of days. They'll play it to the artists, the surviving band members, if there are any still alive. They'll play it to the surviving artists. Then they'll come back to me with a list of stuff, little fine adjustments. I've been doing this so long now, Eric. I know how to make it sound.
I was about to say, they have their faith in you. They know you're going to do the job. They're not concerned about that. But at the same time, they also can say, oh yeah, I really like that. Can you change that? So, that makes sense.
The kind of things they'd want to change. It's all micro tuning. It's all
right.
It gets the only downside of today's modern recording technology, which I have to say I'm a huge fan of. I love having the stems. I love being able to see what I'm hearing as well as it. Back in the day, you couldn't. You had to just hear it and guess. I love the accuracy. I love the non-destructive editing. I'm never going to erase Simon's drums again, am I?
Right. Well, that's the thing. There are pluses to modern technology and the advancements.
On the downside of it is
there's downsides. Yeah,
that people can get too forensic, too microscopically detailed, whereas back in the day, yeah, the vocal kind of got a bit loud just on those couple of words there, but hey ho, that's how he performed it. You try to kind of catch it on the mix and so that it doesn't jump out, but you don't always catch everything, and there's little clicks and bumps and things.
Right. That captures the human element. You don't want to mess with that.
The human element. So the downside is that they should remain nameless to protect the guilty. Some management companies and artists will get back to you with what you can only define as being microscopic alterations. Like, it rarely is it something really definitive. It might be that the tambourine's a bit too loud, or could you just take a little bit of reverb off the lead vocal, or there's a click at 1 minute 13. So you listen to the tape and you go 1:13, and I can get it to go on repeat back and forth from 1:10 to 1:15, and I'm listening for this click, and you're thinking, where the hell is
right?
When you've listened to it about the 50th time, you realize it's the guitar. He's just hit, it's just a click that's come off the guitar pick or something,
Hey guys, thanks so much for checking out the Booked on Rock podcast. If you've just found the podcast, welcome. If you've been listening, thank you so much for your support. And make sure you tell a friend, a family member, share on social media, and let people know about Booked on Rock. And if you do like the podcast, make sure you subscribe, give a 5-star review wherever you listen to the Booked on Rock podcast. We're on Amazon, Apple, iHeart, Spotify, Spreaker, TuneIn, and on YouTube Music. You can check out the full episodes on video, along with video highlights from episodes on the Booked on Rock YouTube channel. Find it at Booked on Rock. Thanks again for listening. Now back to the show. As a Van Halen fan, I want to know. I'm gonna ask you a question, just being as a selfish Van Halen fan here. There's one album that all the fans always talk about from 1988, OU 812. It's one of my favorites. All of the fans, I don't know of any fan who hasn't said there's no bass in it. They need to remix it. Well, Alex Van Halen remastered it recently, but we would love to have him go in there and get the stems and pull the bass up, make it bigger, beefier. Why won't an artist do it?
When you're remastering, you're taking the original. If the bass guitar wasn't loud enough in the mix, which is the general consensus, if you then go into the original mix and you try and you remaster it, and you've got some very sophisticated EQ you can use these days, where you might be able to get in there and find out what are the frequencies that the bass guitar is kicking around it, and you might be able to pull them out a little bit and bring them to the fore a little bit. But it's inevitable that the parts of the bass drum are going to also have that same sonic quality. They're also going to be down there in the same sort of frequency department. So invariably, if you try and pull that bass guitar a bit louder in the mix, when you remaster it, you're probably going to be lifting the bass drum as well.
Oh, so it's affecting other aspects, other parts of the song.
So down there in the same frequency range. I know it's easy, well, not easy, but there is software where you can actually separate the vocal from the rest of the track, and there may well be, I haven't come across it yet, but there may well be software that'll the AI within the software will recognize the bass guitar, and maybe it could be done that way. The best way of doing it would be to go back to the original multi-tracks.
Right. Well, the remaster, it sounds better. It's just that we know that if they remixed it and took all of the individual parts and really just maybe pulled up that bass, our thought is it's going to sound better.
What they should do, Eric, is that they should get the original multi-tracks, transfer them over digitally, send me the stems.
Alex, are you listening?
Jobs are good.
Digby is ready.
Ready at any time.
Yeah. So what are you up to these days? I read I think it was on your website, still working as a freelance engineer. You facilitate music courses for young musicians and sound engineers. You still doing that?
Not doing quite so much of that at the moment, but for a couple of years when we first moved down here to the southwest of England, and we moved down to Devon, I got involved with one of the local music colleges and did a lot of work with some of the young musicians and introducing them to, recording technology of the day. So I did that for a couple of years, occasionally get called back to do that. And I'm always impressed with the young guys and girls. When I was growing up, I had maybe 15, 20 years worth of musical history to draw back on. These guys and girls today, they've got they got best part of 100 years worth of music, and certainly 50, 60 years of what we call rock and roll to go back. And I'm always impressed with the young guys and girls, their knowledge of music. They're always more interested in the fact that I worked with bands like Led Zeppelin and obviously Bob Marley and that than they are with any modern bands I've ever worked with. They want to know about the roots stuff. It's so there's a lot of enthusiasm out there, and I hope the industry doesn't implode on itself, and that the people who are behind the money supply in the music business, and I won't name names because we'll get into trouble, but streaming platforms specifically, that could make it so that for young people wanting to get into music, write songs, perform and record, that they can make it financially worth their while, so they don't have to they don't have to have 1 million streams just to earn $400. You know what I mean? It's crazy. That's one of the big problems. The other one is AI. What are your thoughts on AI? AI, like all computers, Eric, I go back far enough now, I can remember when the first cassette machines came along. All the purists in the recording world saying, that's the end, guys, that's the end. People will just be copying music from cassette to cassette. And then when the first drum machines come, that's the end of drummers. You won't have anybody playing drums anymore. You can do it all on the machine. You can do it with your fingers. That was the death of the drummer. Didn't happen. First synthesizers came along, and then with MIDI and sequencing, that's the end of keyboard players. Didn't happen. We just got to be mindful of it and make sure that we focus on what will be the undoubted benefits that will come from AI. We've got to legislate and be mindful of the wrongdoing that it's capable of. And as with all technology throughout the history of mankind, the wheel was a curse when it was invented, so let's just keep on top of it.
Find the Booked on Rock website at bookedonrock.com. There you can find all the back episodes of the show, the latest episode in video and audio, links to all of the platforms where you can listen to the podcast, plus all the social media platforms. We're on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. Also, check out the Booked on Rock blog, find your local independent bookstore, find out all the latest hot rock book releases, and before you go, check out the Booked on Rock online store. Pick up some Booked on Rock merch. It's all at bookedonrock.com. Digby Smith, 1234, The Life and Times of a Recording Studio Engineer. People can get it on hardcover, paperback, audiobook, Kindle, so they could go to Amazon.com. Also,
Barnes & Noble is another good site.
Okay, and people can find out more about you through your website. What's the website?
TQ1 Music, Tango Quebec 1 Music, M.com.
Digby, this was so great. Thank you so much. I want to thank also, we want to thank Chris Sutton, who is the author of a great book on Sparks, and that's for Sonic Bond Publishing, and he set this interview up. So thanks to Chris, and thank you, sir, for doing this and imparting your wisdom unto us music fans.
You're too kind. Thank you. My pleasure, Eric.
That's it. It's in the books.